pleasure. We just you had a Suda, I'm sure it was a wonderful Suda with Rabbi Bradowitz. This is a Rosh Hashanah for the trees, and it has all sorts of halachic implications. The Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, okay. But also, you sit down to a repast where you get a chance to eat the wonderful fruits of Eretz Israel. And I think that the idea of pleasure is connected in and of itself. It's an idea that needs to be thought about. For some people, and maybe some movements within Yiddishkeit, pleasure is an enemy. It distracts people from spirituality. It can become addictive, and so on and so on. And there's projected a general attitude that pleasure is the enemy. That may just be a misunderstanding of those movements. I'm saying that they're making a mistake, but the idea that pleasure is the enemy is definitely wrong. It's dead wrong. And I'll give you some examples as to why this is so, and then I will try to that is so, and then we'll try to explain it. There's a blessing we make once a year on newly blossoming trees, fruit trees. And in that blessing it says that because Baruch was created Ilanos Tovos, good trees, Brios Tovos, and good creatures, Lahanos Bahem B'nei Adam, to, through them, cause pleasure to people. He created them in order to cause pleasure to people. Now, if he created them to cause pleasure, then pleasure can't be bad. Because Baruch is not tempting us and seducing us into things that are bad for ourselves. Then there's a Tosfos in Ketzim Avarchim, in the Masechta Brachos, a really very fundamental Tosfos. So everybody should learn this. He explains the blessing, the after blessing, Boirei nefashos rabos v'chesronan, akol masher barosa, my version, l'hachios v'mikol chai. And he explains as follows: God creates many souls and provides for their needs. That's the way I'm translating chesronan. There's another way to translate it. That's the way Tosfos takes it. God creates many souls and provides for their needs. Says Tosfos, what are their needs? Bread and water. You can survive on bread and water. That's what it means when it says provides for your needs. Then the bracha goes on. Akol mashabarosa, on all the things that you created, says Tosfos, that's everything else, which he says is created l'ta'anug ba'alma. God created them for the sake of just pleasure. Kegon tabuchim, he says, like apples. Why are there apples? And by extension, squash and meat and cheese and wine and all the rest, they're all created for pleasure. L'ta'anug ba'alma. That's what Tosfos says. I don't think then that pleasure could be an enemy, because Baruch Hu created all those things to give pleasure. It can't be the enemy. Now that's as far as Tosfos goes. But I think if you finish the blessing, you get an even deeper insight. Of course, Tosfos, I'm sure, took this into account. The blessing finishes, Lahachayos behem nefesh kol chai, to cause the spirit of living things to live, to cause them to live. Comes out, according to Tosfos, that blessing is saying that you created all these other foods and beverages and all the rest in order to give them pleasure, so as to cause them to live, which means that if you don't partake of those pleasures, you're not living. You're not living the way the Torah wants you to live. Pleasure is a necessary ingredient in real life. That's the second source. There's a third source, there's a Yerushalmi that says, when you come for judgment after your life, one of the things they will say to you is, we have on record that there were times when you were capable of having a pleasure and you turned it down. Why did you do that? Why did you do that? Explain yourself. Now, from the point of view that I'm attacking, the attitude ought to be, what are you talking about? He should wave the flag and say, look how good I am. I didn't take that pleasure. I turned it down. I'm a great tzaddik. No, Yerushalmi says, you have the opportunity for that pleasure, explain why you turned it down. Clearly, the Yerushalmi takes turning down a pleasure as an accusation. It's a fault. You might have an explanation to excuse yourself, but it's a fault. Why would it be a fault? Obviously, the Yerushalmi takes it for granted that having pleasure is something positive. And I think the greatest proof of all is a description of the world to come. As you very well know, all of our sources agree, the purpose of our creation is to take our place in the world to come. That's why we're created. Everything we do is a way of getting to the world to come. Chapter 1 in the Mesilas Yesharim. What's going to happen in the world to come? What's their condition there? The description is Nehenim miziv hashchina, enjoying the shine of the presence of the of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's being present. But the word is Nehenim, enjoying. So how could enjoyment be the enemy? How could enjoyment be evil? How could enjoyment be the problem if the ultimate existence for which we're created is a state of pleasure? So I think that the idea of pleasure has to be thought about seriously and positively and deeply to try to understand where its value comes from, because it's definitely valuable. Are we together so far? And this, by the way, illustrates a piece of logic which I have mentioned before, but I think it's very important for orienting yourself. There's a difference between proving something and explaining something. A great deal of science is an attempt to explain that which we know already is true. We know it happens that way, we just can't figure out why or how it happens that way. So it's a big difference between proving something and explaining it. And in the Gemara you have this often. You have an authoritative source that says it's true, and you make sure that that source is not contradicted elsewhere. Now you know it's true, but why is it so? That's a separate investigation. Now, I think the sources that I've shown you are proof that pleasure is a positive aspect of a Jewish life. But why would it be a positive aspect? So I have two suggestions to make. But I'm quite aware that this doesn't exhaust the subject. And by the way, part of the difficulty here is what is pleasure. You review the philosophical sources on it, and it's a mess. It's a giant mess. We don't know what it is. We don't know what kind of thing it is. There's no agreement on how to define it. It's a very, very difficult subject. And some psychologists are aware of this, and some psychologists have a completely erroneous thought that, oh, sure, we know what it is. We just have to talk about what to do with it and so on and so on. And that's definitely wrong. As I always do, the first place I go for this is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. If you take out the article on pleasure, you'll see how many different theories there are, how they disagree with one another, and how there are counterexamples to all of them. It's really a mess. But we're going to go through it using our own intuitive ideas and do the best we can with that. Okay. One thing that pleasure does, often, not always, but often, is to create a sense of gratitude. Usually, people feel that pleasure is valuable. They feel that receiving a pleasure is receiving something good. Now, I'm qualifying it because sometimes it's certainly not so, and there could be questions about whether this is so or not, and the literature is filled with controversy on that as well. But the normal thing is that pleasure is something good and pain is something bad. So if that's so, and you receive a pleasure from an agent whom you can identify, then that creates a sense of indebtedness, sense of gratitude. And that sense of gratitude is a relationship. And the relationship continues. For example, if someone does you a favor and you enjoy what you receive from him, and 6 months later he says, I'm in trouble, I need your help. The normal thing is to think, well, I'm glad you came to me because I owe you. I owe you from the fact that you provided me with such a pleasure, and I'll be happy to try to pay it back. So providing someone with a pleasure creates a relationship which continues. And it can be that one of the purposes of providing the pleasure is to create that relationship. And indeed, we have sources on record where Kadosh Baruch Hu indeed sets up exactly that kind of relationship. For example, when the snake is punished for succeeding in influencing Adam and Chava to eat from the tree of knowledge, one of its curses is that it will eat dirt. It will crawl on the ground, not lose its legs, and eat dirt. So the commentaries ask, why is that a curse? Dirt is everywhere. Just imagine that you had a situation where what you need to eat was readily available and inexhaustible. Would you think of that as a curse? Why wouldn't you think of that as a blessing? And the answer that's given is, and by the way, the contrast is drawn between the snake eating dirt and we getting manna in the wilderness, where every night we went to sleep with nothing in the closet because we used up everything, and then next morning we have to eat the new manna that fell that day, except for Shabbos. And the answer that's given is, when you have nothing, you turn to a Kadosh Baruch Hu and you ask. And Kadosh Baruch Hu says, I want to hear from you. To the Jewish people, I want to hear from you. So when you go to bed without, I gave you for today, and you have that gratitude, and when you need for tomorrow, when you turn to me and ask, then you're interacting with me. You're relating to me. That's what I want. The message of the snake is, I don't want to hear from you because I don't want to interact with you. That's part of the punishment. So giving him plentiful, inexhaustible food is a way of disconnecting from him. So when you understand that pleasure is A gives B pleasure, it's a way of creating a relationship of gratitude of B to A. That's creating a relationship, and that's something which can be the good in the pleasure itself. Means the pleasure is good is instrumental. It's because the pleasure leads to something else that's good, but it definitely does. I think that this could be part of the explanation of the Yerushalmi. Let's say you're in a situation where pleasure is available. Now, situations don't happen by accident. They're not random. They're part of divine providence, which put you in a situation where that pleasure was available. So, and then you don't take it, and Yerushalmi says you're going to be taxed. Why didn't you take it? One reason could be because had you experienced that pleasure, you would have felt gratitude, and that feeling of gratitude would have connected you to a Kadosh Baruch Hu in a certain way. And what the Kadosh Baruch Hu wanted by providing you with the opportunity for the pleasure was that you should have the pleasure and connect through gratitude. And that's really good. So then, if the pleasure was available and you didn't take it, Shami says, you'll be asked why you didn't take it. It was an opportunity for this spiritual development. Yeah.
So somebody once told me we were eating a meal, and like they gave out donuts at the end of it. It was on Hanukkah, and he said you should bench first and push off eating the donut so that you don't like grab the donut and you didn't get the pleasure at the moment, but hold off on the pleasure, get the pleasure still, but like push it off until you're done benching and I guess thanking Hashem for
So it's an interesting point. First of all, just in technical terms, I don't know what his position is about making a blessing on cake at the end of the meal. If he doesn't make a blessing on cake at the end of the meal, then the policy he's recommending means you'll make an extra bracha. And that can be bad. It's called a bracha she'eina tzricha. That bracha that's not necessary. I don't know exactly whether it applies exactly in this case, but I think it's quite questionable whether that's good policy in straightforward halachic terms. But when you look at something and you say it's valuable, and it's valuable because it has this valuable effect, it may also have bad effects. One thing can have many effects and contradictory effects. So it could be that a person is overly attracted to physical pleasure and is having trouble resisting it when it's wrong, and he needs to train himself to have more self-discipline, and then it could be true that that's something that he should do. Or even swear off physical pleasure altogether. That could be also. That doesn't mean the pleasure doesn't have it doesn't have value. It has value, but in my circumstances, it's a value which I can't take advantage of. Let's just say a person who has just, God forbid, had a heart attack, and he had a regular schedule of physical exercise. I think he should wait a while before he goes back, and should go back gently to it. Exercise after a heart attack is good, but limited and regulated and monitored. You say, well, wasn't the exercise valuable? It was, but after a heart attack, you have to modify your use of it. So it can be, as I say, there can be safeguards against being overly involved in physical pleasure, and that has to be taken into account, together with the positive value of the pleasure in generating a sense of gratitude. By the way, there is a statement in the Talmud that Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, said that he hasn't had as much pleasure from this world as his little finger. So they ask, how do you reconcile Rabbeinu HaKadosh's statement with that Yerushalmi? I think the idea is that Rabbi Yehuda Nossi was talking about a pleasure that wouldn't be used to generate gratitude by which you can attach to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I mean, a pleasure just for the sake of the pleasure. That he didn't have. But to have pleasure in order to feel gratitude and connect, I can't imagine that he was proud of the fact that he didn't have any of that. We would go against the Yerushalmi. So, and that's a natural consequence of experiencing pleasure, and it's something which has an application in what we call dveikus, connected to Kodesh Baruch Hu. That's one thing. There's another thing also. When A provides B with a pleasure, B will analyze, why did A do that? Why did A do that? And that'll be part of the experience and be part of the resulting relationship. And there are many different reasons why people provide others with pleasure. And that will, sometimes it's vicious. I'm just trying to get you to trust me so that I can destroy you in the end. There are such cases. There's the apron string syndrome, which either is true of Jewish women or isn't, but it made a big hit in certain types of secular Jewish literature, where the mother provides for the child exquisitely, extravagantly, and sensitively, and her purpose, conscious or unconscious, is to create a dependency of the child on her so that the child won't leave her, which is a sickness, and it's debilitating to the child. The child has to learn how to be independent, has to be able to live the child's own life. And this could be a boy or a girl. So that's why they talk about the child leaving home or becoming mature and independent as cutting the apron strings. Doesn't talk about cutting your father's shoelaces. It talks about cutting your mother's apron. And of course, the image is that the woman wears the apron, not the man. It's all very lateralized that way. So there, the mother is really providing pleasure for the child, but that pleasure provided in that way undermines the child. So I think that one has to take into account why it's coming. Now, let's go step by step. Suppose A gives B some pleasure because A is a giver. A is a giver. And pleasure is a good. So A provides B with pleasure because of A's being a giver. What kind of reaction will you have on the part of B? I think here it can be very tricky. I've mentioned a couple of times, I don't remember whether I mentioned it to you or not, but I was in a certain American city and I got a message that a certain psychiatrist wanted to see me. Psychiatrist wants to see the rabbi. Thought, there's trouble there. Psychiatrists usually think they rule the world, they understand everything, they have therapies for everything, and they don't need rabbis. Well, it turned out, this guy told me, that he's been in 5 relationships, and in all cases, the other party left him. And he wants to know why. Well, what am I doing wrong? So I said, well, how do you conduct a relationship? He says, listen, Rabbi, I'm a psychiatrist. I have a lot of money. I not only have money, but I have understanding. And when I have a relationship, I dedicate time and effort and sensitivity, and I draw the other person out to find out who they are, what they're like, and I, try to relate to them in the ways that are meaningful to them, and so forth and so on. So I said, okay, very good. What do you get from them? And he said, Rabbi, I'm a giver, not a taker. I'm a giver. Oh, I said, well, how do you think that makes the other person feel? If you're a giver and not a taker, if they don't give you anything, they feel useless. They feel valueless. They feel like a fifth wheel. That's not a good way for a person to feel. You have to be willing to receive from the other in order to give the other person the feeling of being a giver to you and valuable to you. He couldn't hear me. Psychiatrist. He couldn't hear what I was talking about, and he dismissed what I said, and he said, I'm sorry, you haven't explained, you haven't solved my problem, you haven't explained to me what's going on, and he left. I'm sure to you it sounds like ABC. So now, if this person's giving because he's a giver, he's acting out his own inner character. Where am I in that if he's giving to me? Well, I'm the recipient. I'm the one he's giving to. Okay, so I am the tool whereby he acts out his inner character. That's not a very personal relationship. And here I think there's a big danger, because we say that Baruch Hu created the world out of chesed, and chesed is loving kindness, and the portrayal, and I myself have said this, it's true, it's just that without a supplement you might misunderstand it. He acts out his loving kindness. Well, if there's nothing in the universe other than he can't act it out. So he creates creatures to whom he can be beneficent, to whom he can be generous, so as to realize his loving kindness. Well, if you say that and leave it there, it can sound like it could have been anybody. I created this 5,000. Could have been there 5,000. Doesn't matter. I'm just giving because I'm a giver. Because Baruch Hu doesn't give that way. Baruch Hu doesn't give that way. He gives individually. He gives in terms of taking into account the particular conditions under which the individual exists. And this is what's expressed in the idea of mercy. And loving kindness and mercy are linked in our tradition. They're even linked in the prayers. It says that Kadosh Baruch Hu is good because his mercies never end. He's merciful because his goodness doesn't stop. And it works like this. Kadosh Baruch Hu creates in order to bestow good. For the good to be as perfect as possible, it's important that the recipient earn it, so he feels that he deserves it, not just getting it because of the largesse of someone who's providing it for him. And then to earn it means there are rules by which need to be followed, and if they're followed, then that counts as earning the gift that the Creator wants to give. But what happens if a person fails the rules? What happens if he doesn't earn it? So if the whole purpose of creation is just that Hakadosh Baruch Hu Kiviyachol is realizing his loving kindness, and he's giving the best possible gift, so this person didn't earn it, so he doesn't get it. Other people will get it. But no, in addition, Hakadosh Baruch Hu says to Reuven, you're not making it. You're not succeeding. You're not earning it. So you know what? I'll give you another chance. Or I'll give you some inspiration. Or I'll give you part and not the whole thing. Right? Why does Hakadosh Baruch Hu do that? Because Hakadosh Baruch Hu wants Reuven to succeed. He wants Reuven to succeed. That's his care for Reuven as an individual. That's not just acting out his own internal character of loving kindness, or it's acting it out in a much more sophisticated and complete way. Mercy says, even though you haven't earned it, I want you to succeed. I want to build you up so that you will succeed. That there means that loving kindness is a relationship. It's directed to the individual as a person. Now, if I know that's the why HaKadosh Baruch Hu delivers to me the benefits that he delivers, I feel in it an expression of love. And since I feel an expression of love, it awakens, we have the famous phrase, Kamayim Panim Bel Panim, it's like seeing your reflection in the water. Your face creates the picture of the water, and then you respond to it coming back to you. So if A invests love in B, and B realizes that, B accepts it as an act of love from A, it's very natural for B to respond with love. So it means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is investing in each of us, investing in such a way that he wants us to succeed. Those benefits that we get now create an exquisite relationship, a relationship of love. And that's the second way in which these pleasures that we get are things that will cause us to respond in a very valuable way, or to achieve something of great value. And this, I think, is a description directly of the pleasure in the world to come. We have a pleasure from his presence. Now, what kind of pleasure is that? So, there could be many different ways. You could just look at someone in awe, just be, let's say, a great acrobat, and he's doing somersaults or whatever kind of things that they do. And you say, wow, look at that. That's amazing. And have pleasure from watching him. Now, you could do that. That would be a way of having pleasure from someone's presence. But if that one who's present is addressing you personally and relating to you personally and inviting you into a certain relationship with him, and that relationship is a relationship of love, wow, that presence is something which is just overwhelming. When you love someone, in the presence of someone whom you love, it's one of the most wonderful things that you could possibly imagine. And here it's with the Creator who loves you. So I think that the pleasure there is the cement of this relationship of love, and that's what gives it its value. Yeah.
In davening, what do you think is the best way to feel like Hashem is present with you? I've heard that some people just throughout their day remind themselves, Hashem is here with me, Hashem is here with me. But I asked the same question Rabbi Herenstein with the preface that the challenge is there's nothing to visualize. You're not supposed to think of like a bearded man in the sky, right? He said a lot of people like to visualize the letters Yud K, Vav K. I don't know, that's just something he mentioned.
Yeah.
What, your eyes are closed, you're davening Shemona Esrei, like you're trying to feel it, nothing's happening. Like what are you supposed to think of?
So this is a good question. I think one way to do it is to think about the fact that he wants to hear from me. He wants to hear from me. He's given me 3 opportunities in the day. Ramchal says that prayer is a kind of free dveikus, free connection. To be connected to God is a gigantic spiritual achievement. The highest level of that is prophecy, and it's something which comes in degrees, and we're all on the ladder of trying to move up the ladder and increase the degrees of connection. But that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of merit. But 3 times a day, because Baruch Hu says, free dveikus, free attachment. I want to hear from you. I want to be connected to you. Wow, that's a tremendous opportunity. And in fact, those who analyze the nature of prayer, the consciousness of standing before Kodesh Baruch Hu, according to the Briskers and others, the consciousness of standing before Kodesh Baruch Hu is prayer. Everything else is how you pray. But that is, if you lose sight of that, you're off. It's not prayer anymore. So I think that, if you just take into account that the Creator wants to hear from you, that should be a very inspiring The idea, and that you don't have during the rest of the day. He's not hearing from you in the same way. You can talk to him, but it's not the same. It's not the same relationship. Yeah.
So if we have a whole chain of events that's going to be happening, that Hashem's kind of put into play with the creed, and then our come as like an X factor, and I pray for the opposite or pray for something different, and he accepts that, and then the whole domino effect changes, and it's like a whole sequence. And then if we have millions of people doing the exact same, and everything's constantly changing, and we have the free will to do this, and Hashem can't stop our free will, doesn't that limit his control of what's going on?
Okay. No. First of all, it's that he chooses not to stop our free will, not that he can't stop our free will. We discussed this a while ago. When we say can't, what we mean is he's already made a decision A, and since he made decision A, there are only these options open because of the decision that he made. That doesn't mean he couldn't have done otherwise, or even theoretically change it, number one. Number two, the way you put it, it makes it sound like he had decided to do X, but now that I made with my free will a certain move, he changes his mind and does Y instead. No, that's not the right way to describe it. There's no change of mind. The way to describe it is this. There's a rule that X applies to people in this condition, and there's a rule that Y applies to people in that condition, and I changed my condition from X to Y. Isn't that he decided on X for me? He assigned X to a certain condition. And when you change the condition, you then place yourself under the aegis of a different rule. So he never changes his mind. You just change your position, your condition within his mind, which has set up various categories with various consequences. So, and then that is absolutely true. It's absolutely true. A person does a mitzvah, he gets a reward. Does an avera, he gets a punishment. If he does an avera and does tshuva, then instead of getting a punishment, that punishment is erased. Right? It's not because he changed his mind with respect to so-and-so. There's a rule for people who do transgressions without tshuva, and there's a rule for people who do transgressions with tshuva. They're two separate rules. And he moved himself from this rule to that rule. So Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't change. It's just that the person's relationship, Kodesh Baruch Hu's system changes. Yeah.
So, the 3 times that we daven throughout the day, why do we have to say the Shema Esrei or that's when we're before God? Meaning, like, why can't we just, walk in and close our eyes and say, like, we're praying now at any moment during the day?
The text of the I'm not quite. Are you talking about time now, or are we talking about text now?
So I'm saying within the same, like we can do it within the same time. Like let's say we're going to Mincha, right? Why, like after Mincha, right? And somebody wants to do their own like singular prayer after Shemona Esrei.
After having said Mincha?
Yeah, after having said Mincha, they want to go and do like a further prayer, like just like in English or in their own words, after davening.
Well, I don't think there would be anything wrong with talking to a Kodesh Baruch Hu afterwards and so forth and so on, saying the text of the Shemona Esrei with the names of God. No, you don't want to do that. But Kodesh Baruch Hu is prepared to hear from you all day long. Not that you can't address the Kodesh Baruch Hu at other times. This just won't be the mitzvah of prayer. Won't have the same significance as the mitzvah of prayer. But it's not as if he says, I'm only listening at these times, and other times I'm busy.
But saying like the mitzvah of prayer itself, like why does it have to be in the confines of Shemona Esrei? Meaning like.
Again, the mitzvah, you ask about the mitzvah of prayer, that's a legal question. Mm-hmm. And then you can ask a spiritual question, can't I talk to God at other times? Those are 2 separate questions. The prayers were set up to correspond with the offerings. I'll caught myself this time. Right? It corresponds with the offerings, right? And that's 3 times a day. So that's what the mitzvah of prayer is supposed to do. Talking to God, you can talk to God at all times.
So that we don't give offerings in Ma'ariv, do we?
Well, that's when the remainders of the offerings are burned up on the altar, so the process of the offering goes on all night.
Is there any kind of, we don't say karbanos though by Ma'ariv, right?
Again, we don't initiate. We don't initiate an offering at night, and that's why the status of Ma'ariv is less than the status of the other 2. It's less obligatory.
Is it possible to say the karbanos after you've already davened, or it has to be done before?
It should be done before, but you could say it afterwards. You could say afterwards. Okay, I have to run. I have a chasana tonight. Hashem.
Thank you.